The developers of Beyond Good and Evil 2 weren't the only ones crying during the reveal of the long-requested sequel to Beyond Good and Evil Space Adventures. Fans all around the globe shed tears of joy when Ubisoft finally had mercy on the praying masses, yearning for a return to a universe full of space pirates and talking pigs. The first installment of Beyond Good and Evil was released all the way back in 2003, which means the loyal fanbase behind the title had to wait an excruciating 14 years for this announcement. And while it's certainly easy to fall into unbridled euphoria and be washed away by the wave of excitement and hype that sweeps across the gaming community right now, why don't we all just take a deep breath, calm ourselves down, and try to assess the situation a little more neutral. I understand that some of you had to wait over a decade for a Beyond Good and Evil sequel, and you have every right to be ecstatic. I'm not asking you to stop being excited about the game. I think during the last 8 months since Beyond Good and Evil 2's reveal at E3 2017, we've gathered enough information on the game to speculate about the possible problems that could lead to a disappointed fanbase once the final game gets released. We haven't even seen a polished piece of gameplay yet, so it goes without saying that I'm not actually criticizing the finished game. All I want to do is take a look at the bits and pieces of information the developers of Beyond Good and Evil 2 have given us thus far and take Ubisoft's recent business decisions into account. I'm simply asking the question: should we be worried? Given what we know about the original Beyond Good and Evil and the aspects fans admired, should we be alarmed about any of the most recent design and business decisions in regards to the sequel? Michel Ancel created the first Beyond Good and Evil with a franchise in mind, so it's safe to say that both creators and fans never asked the question if it would be a good idea to make a sequel to the game. Pretty much everyone who played the original is in agreement. The world and characters of Beyond Good and Evil are just too rich and appealing. Not exploring this unique and somewhat bizarre sci-fi universe any further would be a huge waste of potential. Now that the long-anticipated successor is finally a reality, we have to ask a much more important question though. What do people want from a sequel? During all those years, what type of game were people imagining when they thought of a hypothetical Beyond Good and Evil 2? And will the final game match their expectations? It's easy to see why hardcore fans of the original might have mixed feelings regarding the direction Beyond Good and Evil 2 is taking. There are plenty of radical changes from the first one, and it's undeniable that Beyond Good and Evil 2 isn't an ordinary sequel to an already established franchise. Take the shift from Uncharted 1 to 2 as an example. Despite the fact that Uncharted 2 improves upon Drake's fortune in every way, regardless if we are talking about the graphical fidelity, set pieces, pacing or gameplay mechanics, Uncharted 2 still has the same basic structure as the first one. Both Uncharted Drake's Fortune and Uncharted Among Thieves are linear, character-driven, single-player adventures. And that's how it works most of the time. The first game establishes the franchise, and 2 to 4 years later, the sequel tries to refine and improve everything the first one did. However, this doesn't apply to Beyond Good and Evil 2, and the reason for that is plain and simple. Times have changed. The gaming industry is one of the fastest growing and changing industries in the world. It's safe to assume that Beyond Good and Evil 2 won't see the light of day any earlier than fall 2018. So at least 15 years lie between the release of Beyond Good and Evil 1 and 2. Much has changed since the release of the first game, and we can already see that some of these changes have found their way into Beyond Good and Evil 2. It's not going to be your usual sequel. It's shaping out to be radically different from the original in many ways. Beyond Good and Evil 1 was a 10-hour long, linear, single-player experience, whereas the sequel looks like the exact opposite. In all likelihood, Beyond Good and Evil 2 will be a 100-hour long, open-world, online multiplayer experience. Roughly speaking, the first game was comparable to Uncharted, and the second game has more in common with online multiplayer action role-playing games like Destiny or Anthem. No one truly knows if the franchise will benefit from the new direction or if it will destroy everything Beyond Good and Evil stands for. As far as I'm concerned, it could go both ways, so let's have a look at both sides of the argument. First, let's work out how the new direction of Beyond Good and Evil could damage the franchise and disappoint the fanbase. Could being the operative word. If you ask me, there are two major concerns. Firstly, the drastic genre shift from a linear single-player game to an open-world multiplayer game, and secondly, Ubisoft's fixation on games as a service. One could make the argument that the magic of the original Beyond Good and Evil was partly linked to its genre. The game always focused on its characters and the engagingly told narrative. Beyond Good and Evil's 10-hour length and linear single-player nature were a strength, not a weakness. It allowed the creators to keep the spotlight on the character relationships and story at all times. If the second installment of Beyond Good and Evil is anywhere near as ambitious in scale as is currently suggested, it's quite possible that issues commonly associated with open-world games will plague Beyond Good and Evil 2 as well. Due to the sheer size of the world and quantity of side activities, the first game's emphasis on characters, story, and a well-balanced pacing could be pushed into the background. But not only creative decisions made by the developers play a big role. The business decisions made by Ubisoft as a company could also affect Beyond Good and Evil in a negative way. Recently, Ubisoft put out a slideshow as part of a quarterly earnings report. Based on the provided data and the future plans for the company as stated by Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot, we now know that Ubisoft is planning to release fewer games per year, but intends to follow the same business model that has proven so successful for Assassin's Creed Origins, Rainbow Six Siege, Ghost Recon Wildlands and For Honor. Moving forward, Ubisoft wants to put its energy into creating games as a service. And we all know what this term stands for. More and more publishers support their games with tons of post-launch content like story DLCs, cosmetic items, new game modes and all kinds of expansion packs. Such content is easy to make since the base game is already finished and ideally guarantees a continuing revenue stream for comparatively low production costs. Why produce a new Assassin's Creed for over $100 million when Ubisoft can continue to make insane amounts of profit from the large player base invested in Assassin's Creed Origins? Instead of releasing a new For Honor or Assassin's Creed this year, all they have to do is keep the content flowing. In other fucking words, companies like Ubisoft can make a shit ton of money as long as they continue to entertain the players with microtransactions and loot boxes in the form of new maps, weapons, vehicles, clothing and other shenanigans. Taking a look at Ubisoft's earnings report, the strategy of releasing fewer games but maintaining a large player base for months or even years after the game's initial release, thanks to the games as a service model, seems to pay off. Big time. During the last 9 months, Ubisoft made $318.5 million from add-on content, which is an 87% increase from last year. Meanwhile, Activision Blizzard made a staggering $4 billion from microtransactions in 2017. You can bet your ass that Beyond Good and Evil 2 is part of Ubisoft's games as a service plan. The first game might have turned into a beloved classic for a small fan base, but let's not forget that the original Beyond Good and Evil wasn't exactly a financial success. Ubisoft's commitment to their games as a service model and the popularity of online multiplayer games are the reason why Beyond Good and Evil 2 is so radically different from the first one. After all, the game's setting is tailor-made for for microtransactions. What better excuse for loot boxes than a game that takes place in an uncharted solar system full of spacefaring pirates? Taking all this into consideration, the implementation of Ubisoft's games as a service model is pretty much a done deal. But will it be for the best of the game? That being said, maybe the same arguments could be used to support a more positive take on Beyond Good and Evil 2. I'm not a fan of microtransactions, however there are different types of microtransactions with a varying degree of negative influence on the gameplay experience. As long as the microtransactions in Beyond Good and Evil 2 are cosmetic or function as a way to save time, at least we are not dealing with a Star Wars Battlefront 2 scenario, meaning microtransactions that outright destroy the entire gameplay experience. Maybe Ubisoft will make similar improvements to Beyond Good and Evil 2 post-launch, as is the case with Rainbow Six Siege or For Honor. I'm not a supporter of this whole games as a service approach, but it's also obvious that games like Rainbow Six Siege actually benefited a great deal from the constant improvements and the continuous addition of content. Rainbow Six Siege and For Honor had a rocky start, but due to regular updates and improvements, the already existing fanbase keeps being invested. Even more, Rainbow Six Siege reached a new monthly active user record in December, and For Honor's player base grew to 7.5 million, which is quite an achievement regarding the fact that both games have been around for a while. And what about the shift from a linear single-player game to an open-world multiplayer experience? Well, maybe the new open-world approach and RPG elements will enrich Beyond Good and Evil rather than destroy it. The universe of Beyond Good and Evil seems predestined for a vast, explorable open-world playground. Instead of betraying the original, the shift to the open-world genre could allow Beyond Good and Evil to finally reach its full potential. I'm an admirer of linear single-player games. At the same time, I'll have to admit, a universe full of space pirates, planets and alien races sounds like the perfect candidate for a massive open world. I know Uncharted good enough to know that a sudden shift from Naughty Dog's linear single-player formula to an open-world Uncharted would destroy almost everything that makes the series special. Not all franchises could survive such a drastic change. Uncharted 4 and the new God of War feature larger areas than the previous games, but they are still undoubtedly linear single-player experiences. But in Beyond Good and Evil's case, it's not out of the question that the open-world multiplayer elements are a welcome change after all.
True freedom lies beyond.
And this is where you come in. I'm not overly attached to the original Beyond Good and Evil, and I tend to be optimistic in regards to upcoming video game releases. I'm super excited to explore this universe. Then again, I'm not really the target audience, so please share your opinions in the comments section, because I'm eager to know what true die-hard Beyond Good and Evil fans have to say about the changes which have been made so far. Are you in favor of Beyond Good and Evil turning into an open world franchise, or are you totally against it? I hope I did a good job to point out arguments for both sides. Feel free to add things I've missed and tell me what made the first Beyond Good and Evil so special from your perspective. And as always, don't forget to praise the sun.